we're going to go through again. Remember, this course is rock skipping across the pond, so we don't stay anywhere for very long. We're going to look at a couple of the principles from the book, The Ascent of a Leader. Have any of you read that? Calvin, of course you did. None of you. Okay, this is the book that I used to use in class, and when Calvin took a similar class to this, I think we read 2 chapters and discussed them in detail every day, didn't we?
Well, I took yours distant, so I had the whole book, and I had to give you right up on it.
This book used to be kind of the centerpiece of one of the whole courses I did. Now we're going to go through it in 5 minutes, but this is one that is well worth picking up. It's called The Ascent of a Leader, and he defines leaders, or they define leadership as occurring any time one attempts to influence the behavior of an individual or group, regardless of the reason. This is not spiritual leadership. This is just generic leadership. So it's really talking about influence. And when you talk about leadership, training your churches and all, people think, oh, you're talking elders. Or if you have a child, you're a leader. If you're in a team at work, you're a leader. You are exerting influence. And to be able to make people aware of the fact that they do have influence, and that influence is a kind of stewardship. Just like their money, just like their talents, their influence is a kind of stewardship. And anybody can benefit from some level of leadership training. Too many leaders spend their energies trying to appear more consistent in a superficial way rather than becoming more consistent in a heartfelt, genuine way. There is a tendency and a pressure for leaders to look good, is the bottom line. And that looking good can sometimes get in the way or hamper or become a challenge to a leader living in a genuine way. He talks about 2 ladders. The first one is the capacity ladder. And what's the first one? Discover what I can do. Okay. And he draws the ladder. Terrible orange. I messed up already, didn't I? I did. There we go. Okay, well, wrong one. Okay, I discover what I can do, and then I develop those capacities. Right? If I realize that I can sing decently, then I take singing lessons. If I'm a good dancer, then I take dancing lessons. I just discover what I can do, and then I try to go and get a title or a position that will allow me to do even more of that thing that I've discovered that I do so well. And then I attain my individual potential. Okay, anything wrong with that? Yeah. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. Isn't that what you do? Isn't that what you're helping your children to do? Find out what he's a good baseball player. Oh, let's send him to camp or get him a good coach, and let's hope he is the third baseman for the Yankees, and then he'll make a lot of money. And isn't that kind of the ladder that we want people on? Mm-hmm. Is anything wrong with it?
Well, except for the fact that me, it ought to be inverted.
You're right. I did it the wrong way. That's right. What I think it should be down here.
Yes, not in that case.
Okay, this is the capacities. That's his title. And this is potential. Sorry about that. Okay, so what's wrong with that? It sounds pretty reasonable to me. He's kind of funny. He puts a hinge on this ladder because it's very mobile. You can just fold it up and take it and unfold it in a number of different areas. So this is sort of a mobile sort of ladder. But this is incomplete. And we'll talk about his developmental ladder as we go along here. He talks about for people to truly flourish, they need environments of grace. Right? And grace means that people don't get what they deserve.
Amen.
Amen to that. Right? People flourish most when they're in environments of grace. When we had yesterday up the bad leader and the good leader, when we said, what do you feel like when you're in the presence or under a good leader, what you all described was an environment of grace. Right? You feel encouraged. You feel supported. Somebody's got your back. You feel like people are investing in you. You just begin to thrive. And that's what you mean by an environment of grace. And you trace any act of grace back to its roots, and you'll find that ultimately its source is God. People feel safe in an environment of grace. They grow up. They trust each other. They live authentically, right? They don't need to hide and cover up mistakes. They can bring the mistakes out, and they can learn from them. They celebrate each other. They laugh a lot. They produce better. The alternate is what you felt under the bad leader, right? Mistrust and ungrace, right? And it really is the responsibility of the leader to create the environment. That's one of the things that leaders do, is they create cultures, they create climates. And wise leaders realize that and do it intentionally. In order for people to grow, they need relationships of grace. The most significant factor affecting organizational productivity, according to this one study, was interpersonal relationships developed on the job. It wasn't skill level, it wasn't training, it wasn't raw material. It was, did the people like being there, and did they like the people they were working with? That made them productive. Wow. When we listen, we meet someone needs for attention. When we affirm, we meet the need for significance. When we protect, we meet their need for security. Two types of organizations. There's the task-driven. The leaders use the followers for their own benefit. Those who live amid ungracious leaders learn to hide the truth. They talked in this book about a situation that was a cutthroat medical training program where the young interns went in and they had to eat and sleep at were on call all hours. They told them that at least half of them would be cut. So it set up a very highly competitive program among the students. They hated the doctors. They hated their work. And ultimately, they began to question whether they were even going into the right profession. They completely re-examined this. They got a new head, and they made it completely into a mentorship program, where once you got in, unless you really messed up, you were guaranteed that you were going to graduate. And so, under situation number one, you make a mistake. What do? Either you're gone or you hide it really quick, right? And if you see your colleague make a mistake, you have something against them, right? Situation number two, you make a mistake, what happens?
You learn.
You learn. It gets brought out. Your mentor corrects you, talks to you about it. What kind of doctor do you want to go to? One who's been trained like this, or one who's been trained like this, who feels secure, who likes the profession that they're in. There was an environment of ungrace created, and there was an environment of grace created. They will, the relational organization, leaders treat people as the objects and focus of their success. Right? If I'm the team leader, when you guys do it, then I shine. Right? My job is to see you guys be as successful as you can be. Right? That's a relational organization. When it comes right down to it, it's not what we do that brings fulfillment, but with whom we do these things. Achieving a vision requires unity of hand and heart, vocation, and of soul. Have you ever experienced an environment of grace? I think yesterday we sort of talked a bit about that. You know that feeling when you're in one. How much of what you do is truly a reflection of who you are? If money were no object, what that you do now would you keep doing, and what would you stop doing altogether? The stuff you would keep probably is a reflection of who you believe you really are. And wouldn't it be nice to have a leader say, I want to find that thing, and I want to develop that in you, and I want to see that released for the benefit of this organization. Wow. And versus I have a list of things that need to get done, and snap to. Because fulfillment requires that we receive acceptance, affirmation, and other expressions of love. Why do some people work exclusively for wealth, position, and status? They're climbing up a ladder that's up against the wrong wall. Okay, so now he says that these things are important, but actually there are other rungs that need to go in here, particularly for the spiritual ladder. The first one is the need to trust God with others and me. At some point in ministry, you realize you can't change people. All you can do is leave it to God, and God will change it. And that's a good day to get to. And a lot of times it's a frustrating place to get to. And it's taken a lot of hurt and a lot of bumps. When you get to the point where you can trust God with others, right? They are in God's hands. It is not ultimately my responsibility to change them. That's God's work, right? Mine is to teach and to serve and to lead. Then the other one is to trust God with you. If your identity is not clearly rooted in God, in Christ, then your leadership is just going to be a desire to make yourself feel good or make yourself feel significant. If you're not drawing your significance from who God is and your relationship with God, then you're going to start to try to draw your significance from a lot of other different sources. Someone who is trusting God with others and themselves display a genuine humility. And that really can't be faked. We must allow the myth of self-sufficiency to end. All that we have, no matter how much or how little, comes as a gift from God. A person who is truly trusting God with others and themselves has a very thankful heart. So how do you develop trusting relationships? The higher somebody goes in leadership, the higher they go on this ladder, the shakier the ladder gets. When people are down below, it's always, things are great up there, right? That's where the power is, and the prestige, and the money, and the good car, and the parking space. The higher you go up in responsibility, the shakier the ladder gets, right? For a number of reasons. One there's a lot of relational pressures on you at this point. That's why the pressures to be isolated, to hide your faults. There's a lot of pressures of other people's expectations, particularly in church. Are you kidding? They know what they think the pastor should be and do, and they'll tell you regularly, and they'll send you emails, and they'll call you late at night. That's tough. The expectations get tough, and people in lower levels don't realize that pressure until they're up in it. And sometimes they don't respond to it very well, unless you're rooted. Or hopefully, a lot of times that will ground you in God. That will send you back to God. Those kind of expectations. The second one that he puts in here is another rung, is a choosing vulnerability. This is a tough one. This is a really tough one for leaders, particularly for male leaders. I was trying to get one class to start journaling more. And one pastor said, he was shaking his head. I said, what? He said, never put anything in writing. I thought, oh, okay. What kind of environment is this guy living in, right? That anything that's put in writing could be used against you, right? So he didn't want to journal. He didn't want to put anything in writing. Wow, that's not a whole lot of vulnerability. I was having a breakfast with a guy from church. He owns the fastest growing door business in the Northwest. Garage doors and commercial doors and things like that. And he's a recovering alcoholic. And I didn't actually know that about him. And we started talking. And he said, "Yeah," I said, "I feel like if the more people know about me, the less they would really like me." I said, "Whoa. So what's your strategy? To hide from everybody? How's that working for you?" And in leadership, it can get that way. You really don't want to be vulnerable. And I'm not talking about here, spilling your guts on Sunday morning to everybody. But there's got to be a few close people, that there's a covenant relationship that we are for each other, and we can put some of that stuff out there. If you don't have that, the stuff is going to leak out in other areas where you don't want it to. When you have, a close core of people, and sometimes, it's not necessarily your elders. Sometimes maybe they're too close. I think some people that are coming to these modules are starting to find people like that. Pastors in another city, and hey, I see you 2 or 3 times a year. Let's make sure every time we get here that we're heading out to breakfast. All right, what's really going on in your marriage? Oh, let me tell you the disaster at my church. I can't say it to anybody else, but to have somebody that you can be that vulnerable is a very transforming experience. But the temptation for leaders, the higher up they go, the more responsibility, the more is at stake, the more likely they are to close themselves off from these very relationships that they need and will produce help from them. Many leaders live apart from the benefit of significant others speaking into their lives. They depend on personal distance for protection. And again, this doesn't mean that you let everybody all the way in, but you got to let a couple people all the way in if you're going to remain healthy over the long run. Vulnerability is more than transparency. In vulnerability, you deliberately place yourself under another's influence, submitting yourself to another's strength. So you allow people to have access and to speak into your life. Doesn't mean they control you, but it's more than just sharing what's going on. It's now saying, what do you think about this? Well, and I'm going to trust you to come in and begin to speak into my life. Having a strong, committed mentor is key. But when people get to a certain level of leadership, they seem to be the ones doing all the mentoring, and they kind of lose that sometimes. You choose to let others know you, to have access to your life, to teach you, and to influence you. This happened to me kind of recently with the band of brothers I have, 3 other guys that I meet with who I've given this kind of access into my life. They know me really well. And a situation came up, and I was doing what I usually do. I was shying away from it. I didn't want to face it head on. And they walked in, and they just nailed me. They were like, okay, the reason you're doing this is because you always do this, because you tell yourself that you're not significant enough to step in and make a difference. You know what? You are. This is what you need to do. And they totally kicked me in the pants, and they said, this is what you need to do in this situation. I was like, okay, all right, I know. They're right. And I went back, and, that situation I had been avoiding, I walked right into. And it turned out actually really quite well. But these are guys, they know me, they know my weaknesses, they know the things I shy away from, and they're not going to let me get away with it anymore. They're going to say, you got to start facing that stuff, and they push me right into it. I probably would have done it if they hadn't, but boy, it resolved a lot of things that had been unresolved for a while. So to have a couple of core people that are speaking into your life is so important. So, why do we fear vulnerability? There are a number of good reasons to fear vulnerability. What are some? Why would you?
Sometimes it's like blood in the water.
It's like blood in the water. Yeah. Right.
It attracts sharks.
You have to be very careful, right, in choosing and developing these kind of friendships over time to reach that level of vulnerability. And that's another thing we don't do well. We don't spend the time. We don't invest the time to do it. Right. You don't just become vulnerable to everybody everywhere. You get those few core people. Why else do we fear vulnerability?
Makes you look weak.
It makes you look weak. We're leaders. People look up to us. Right? We can't look weak, particularly as men. Women don't have a problem with that so much. They love to get. I can't believe what my wife talks to her girlfriends about. They don't seem to have a problem with that at all. What else? It's one more reason why you might fear that vulnerability.
It requires you to be open of your weaknesses to other people.
Say again?
It requires you to be open about your weaknesses to other people.
Right. It requires you to be open about your weaknesses to other people. And this is where, unless you're doing this, in fact, to the extent to which you're doing this, you're either going to be able or not able to do that. Right? If you are laying yourself bare before God, and He is beginning to work in certain areas of your life, you are going to be able to take them to somebody you are going to be able to trust. If you're just going through a rote relationship with God or a token relationship with God, you're not going to do this, right? So these really do build on each other. Do you know two or more people who you entrust implicitly? Do you have that in the friendless American male? We really don't do this well. So many men have buddies, but they really don't have friends. They've got fishing buddies or golfing buddies or bowling buddies, but to really talk about the issues of life, a lot of them don't even have the vocabulary to do it. Even if they wanted to talk about what was going on, but they don't seem to even know how to do it. They don't seem that equipped.
Or if you've done it and then you had a bad experience from it.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Right. Okay, I'm done. So much for the vulnerability thing, right? And he said if you've done it and then it turned out bad, right? Or that person, used something against you. I have found in my relationship with men, I am always the one that has to be vulnerable first if I want to take the friendship deeper. I have yet to run into a man who will be vulnerable first. I always think, what? Let me tell you something I'm really, and I go, oh, you are? And then all of a sudden they'll go deeper. But they'll wait for me to do it first. I wish I just find one person who would do it first, but I haven't yet. But I think if I want this relationship to go deeper, I've got to. I remember, I guess because of my experiences in China and everything on the mission field, you forge these kind of relationships very quickly. I imagine in the military it's sort of the same way. You're thrown together, you're being attacked, or you're going through boot camp or some shared trauma, and all of a sudden you know everything about each other. This is why the DFW, they have reunions year after year after year, because you never had buddies like you had them back in the military. And there's a forging that takes place there. Where was I going with that?
Vulnerability. Step in first.
Right. Oh yeah, I have to step in first. I still don't know where I was going.
Turn off the tape.
No. Okay, who do you trust implicitly? Right. Oh yeah. Okay. So these things get forged. For me, it was forged in China. We were in China. There's not that many other men, and you share these adventures and these traumas together. And so I guess I got in a mode of forging these kind of friendships pretty quick. And then I came back to America, where everything just seemed to go at a snail's pace. And I remember one adult minister. I said, I'm trying to get these guys to go out, once a week for breakfast, minimum requirement to build a friendship, and they don't even seem to be ready to do that. He's like, oh yeah, he said, these American men, you're going to have to teach them how to be friends, because they don't know. Like, oh, I'm going to have to teach them? He said, yeah, you're really going to have to teach them how to be friends, because they don't know how. it takes time and it takes effort. It's tough. Let's say I'm in this group of 4 men, and we have a hard time, finding time to get together. We want to try to get a retreat. Well, get 4 men to have 2 days off. It's nearly impossible. It takes a lot of work and some flexibility, on your part to try to make this happen. How do you protect and care for those who have been vulnerable with you? Whenever somebody shares something, and as pastors, you're often confessors. People will share something with you on a deeper level than you have ever with them. I found almost inevitably the next day I will initiate some kind of contact to say thank you, for sharing that, and reaffirm that is in total confidence, and I'm there for you in whatever that issue was that you just shared. It is really important, because once you've been vulnerable and then you walk away from that, you immediately think, I should have done that. That was stupid. What are they thinking now? Who are they making a phone call to just tell my secret to? Immediately after you're vulnerable, there's this, oops, that was it. But then you get a call right away, hey, thanks. That was tough, but I think it was a big step that you admitted that, or you shared that, and then just say, that's in confidence. That, okay, all right, maybe it was okay. And I told somebody that. I think you do need to protect when people are vulnerable with you. Okay, number 3, align with the truth. Painful as it might be. This is the truest test of character, not just coming under others' influence, but acting on the wisdom and truth of their counsel. There's no use developing these kind of relationships if you're never going to act on anything any of these people ever speak into your life. There needs to be a point where you have to be open to say, all right, they're seeing something that I'm not seeing about me or in this situation. And even though everything cries out for me to run the other way, they say go this way, and I'm going to do it. Aligning with the truth and the input that others can give you. Right? In Hebrew, a belief is not a belief until it's acted upon. In Greek, though, a belief can be separated from action. Right? And we're really used to doing that. Number 4, and this list is paying the price. There will inevitably be a price to be paid for being a leader. Right? I was talking about Pastor Wolfson, the price he had to pay. His reputation, it was done, his obituary has already been written. Right? Ouch! For a proud man, that's a killer. But God will work what He needs to work in through the divine arrangement of those situations that you need most. God is not random in these things. He's not just into the wounding business. He's into the heart reshaping business. And when I broke my nose when I was 18, they had to break it again in order to reset it properly. Do I wish they needed to do that? No. But kind of the same way with God. Sometimes our hearts need to be broken in certain areas in order to be reformed and refashioned. And at that point, some leaders just say, price too big. I'm out. I'm done. Right? If you're going to be a spiritual leader, there's going to be a price to pay. On the 4th rung of the capacity ladder, we may enjoy certain privileges. Right? So we're up to here. We're up to title now. Right? We're up to title now. Privileges, power, and authority. And therefore, we face the greatest potential loss or pain in honoring the character ladder. We have more to lose. Right? At this point, all right, I got the title, right? And I got the job, and I got the salary. All of a sudden, there's something to protect and maintain here. And at this point, am I going to take the risks and pay the price and possibly risk all of this to really accomplish what God wants us to do? Has God ever put a challenge in front of you where it's all on the line? not going to grow as a leader until you take up a challenge like that. And he does that. And there's often a price to be paid. Paying the price means choosing to lead and follow from conviction rather than reacting to circumstances. Okay, here's some dangers. We may subtly shift our emphasis away from what's best for those under our care to what's best for our own ego at this point. This is where it gets dangerous and dicey. And some new temptations come in that we are completely unfamiliar with and maybe not prepared to deal with. We may succumb to the myth of arrival, leading us into arrogance. Right? I can only really associate with people who have reached my plateau in life. Right? I don't really have anything else to learn from anybody under me. When you find that you only ever agree to trips where you're the one speaking, that may be a danger. Right? Where you never go somewhere just to learn. Right? There's this sort of, I've arrived on a certain plane and this is where I belong, and I'm only really going to associate with people that are in my same lofty status. We may come to believe that we cannot be understood by anyone else except those in this similar clique or club. The fact is, anybody who is earnestly seeking after God can have an impact on our lives. Right now, the guy who's just blowing me away, encouraging, is a guy I met playing hockey who's a roofer, who's a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, who came to Christ back in January, and that guy just blows me away, walking with God and the way God is changing his life. I love spending time with that guy, and he cusses, still, all the time, and he's not a refined guy at all. I don't think he finished high school. I'm pretty sure he didn't. He had a rocky start. Everybody's normal until you get to know him. This guy was kind of like that. Got to know his story. It's like, oh my gosh. But boy, he just told me last week. He said, I am closer to God than I've ever been, and this is the most real thing that has ever happened in my life. Wow. My relationship with God. Wow, what a cool guy. I just love being around that guy. So we need to continue to be open to people at all levels, even when we get to a certain place in leadership. Unresolved life issues, at this point, they start leaking out, and they can cause leaders to lose objectivity. It can become quite difficult to distinguish organizational problems from the leader's personal problems. This is where your stuff becomes the organization stuff. Have you ever tried to create, under a bad leader, an environment of grace? You had a bad leader, the supervisor was bad, but you're at this level with other people at this level. Have you ever tried at that level to maintain an environment of grace? To have relationships that were encouraging and all. How'd that go? What was that like?
I remember when I was working my way through college, and my boss swore a lot. He would always, when he'd get mad, he would yell out, "Jesus Christ!" And so when we worked in a warehouse, so I started yelling back, "Loves you." But he stopped yelling that eventually. So it's kind of comical when you mentioned that. That's the first thought that came in my head, that was a way that I stopped him from using the Lord's name in vain, but without infringing on his territory.
That was clever.
I like that.
Yeah. Anybody else? Have you ever tried? You did. The head guy is really, but you're trying to build something kind of positive or under that. Have you ever had that experience?
Antichrist. I remember my last year in the Army. Actually, my 5th year in the military, I had asked God. It was during the time our unit and stuff was getting ready to go to Iraq and fight and all this. And before they even talked about going, I had asked God to get me out early so that I could do ministry full time. So the Lord gave me a plan in regards, within the legal limits of the military, putting in the PO and all of the process that I had to go through. My chief, because of that, it was during the transition time. I had switched from my chief who I had led him to Christ, so our whole team was saved. We were praying before we go to work, but then that team got broken up, and I got a chief who was just totally anti-God. So I was still trying to be, I was a sergeant, so I didn't lead like the average E5 would lead. I kind of treated the soldiers like men, kind of talked to them, kind of counseled them, more from a spiritual perspective, and I always caught the bad end of the stick on that, But it's clashing. I think as a leader, you really got to know your purpose, because that's the price you'll pay in a situation such as that. It can kind of, and there were many times when I was like, man, this ain't even worth it. There's even times that I, threatened with Article 15s and, confinement to the barracks away from my family and all of this stuff. Just for me asking God if I could get early. But I understood that it was all a part of what God was doing with me, to see how bad I really wanted to do what I believe He was calling me to do. He's like, you got to go through some stuff first. It's not just going to be, okay, yeah, man,
My experience is you can try, but it doesn't seem to last that long. And when the top guy, you can try to, but eventually that gets attacked. And this guy is threatened by that. Is not going to let that happen very long. It's a tough thing. Eventually, the leader's problems become the organization's problems. So if you've done all this well, he talks about the fifth-rung leader, and there's a number of secular authors that are writing about this as well. It's a stage in a leader's life when generally they let go of that thing that they built, and they move in from what's called a kingship phase into the sage phase. At that point, it's not retirement, sitting in the rocking chair, but it is sort of the giving up of some of these titles and positions, but in order to enter into maybe even a more broader time of influence, of scope of influence. Harmony or congruence, when their lives just seem to fall together for reasons beyond their control. Getting there depends on the process of developing character in the context of right relationships in environments. If you've done these things well, then the potential is for this to happen. If you haven't done these, then when you lose your title, people are like, good riddance. They never even want to see you again, right? If you've done these things well, when you lose their title, he's freed up. Let's ask him to do this. Let's ask him to do this. All of a sudden, the influence maybe is even broader than it was before. I remember I was watching, when I was reading this book the first time, I was watching a documentary about Eleanor Roosevelt, of all people, and it was her life, and it was a somewhat interesting life. She pushed the envelope on some women's social issues and redefined the role of what a first lady should be. And when her husband died and the war ended, they formed the United Nations, and the world looked around and said, who has the status globally that we could put in charge of writing the UN Declaration for Human Rights? A potentially, enormously influential document. And they got Eleanor Roosevelt. And she wrote that and was influential. And that is, that's not a big deal to you and I, but anybody living in any country under oppression has a copy of it and knows what it is. And that's the ideal. In China, the house church pastors in China, they know the UN Declaration, and they want those freedoms. It's a really influential document outside of our borders. But here's a lady who, pushed the envelope, and then when time came, If she didn't vote, wasn't elected that, she didn't run for office, wasn't her goal, but she was brought up into something that had enormous potential good and influence. I was sitting there thinking, oh, okay, that's kind of what the fifth run leader is like. They looked around, she's the one that they'd have to do that.
Is that the piece that brought about the World Health Organization?
I'm not sure. I think that was different. Leaders are carried to the fifth rung by some unseen force or will beyond their own. That's their terminology. I would say God in the case of a spiritual leader. And this isn't something that they really planned for. God takes the initiative to lift us up when He chooses. And it's a wonderful thing to meet somebody in this kind of stage of life versus the alternate, right? Bitter, mad at everybody. To see someone who is in latter stages of their life in a time of fulfillment, and influence is really an awesome thing. Discovering destiny depends on God giving us eyes to find it. There is some mystery to it. But this does not minimize our responsibility to seek and evaluate the opportunities presented us. Leaders who aspire to the fifth run must also continue to take risks. And at this point, the risk might not be so much their title or position, but they might really be putting their reputation on the line. Leaders will become stewards of influence, not slaves of it. And it's all about giving it away. Ever-expanding search for ways to care for and improve the circumstances of others. At this point, the person is done building what they built, and now really it's just about spending those last years giving it away. In positions of great influence, great or small, these fifth-rung leaders retain a character ladder perspective on life. They're still not going to compromise themselves no matter what. They'll not pursue their potential at this expense of conviction or character. They'll look to God and their community, not their own evaluation, to affirm their influence. They seldom rely on short ladder power or lapse into its tactics. They care less about magnitude and more about making right choices on the lower runs. You can plan for your destiny. You cannot plan for your destiny, but you can prepare for it. Right? Confront areas in your life of complacency or indifference. Seek out ways to express your compassion and convictions. Remain teachable and teach others. Seek a destiny of faith over a destiny described by sight alone. That's a great one. Share the benefits of your influence. Prioritize your relationships and aggressively seek to resolve your own character issues and weaknesses. Do it, because it will become, as you rise in your leadership influence, your problems will unfortunately become the problems of others. So how to get started climbing these ladders? You need ordinary people to be willing to tell you the truth and also receive truth from you. You need people who are willing to have fun with you. You need to actively participate in each other's lives, just like we saw Jesus doing. Amazing. Committed time creates the opportunity for vulnerability, and vulnerability produces trust. It's really in the times away from the structured meetings that you really get to know people, and that things really come out that are the kinds of things that will build character. So who do you trust with you? Who are your allies in this climb up the ladder? And where can you find more? And where will you begin to build a community of grace? All right, Calvin, we're done for that.